Hey, what's up, America? Donald Trump's tariffs reinstated. Yes, so a couple of days ago, a federal court struck down Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs worldwide. And that seemed like a big victory for Democrats until about an hour ago when a U.S. court temporarily reinstates the tariffs until an appeals ruling is done. So Donald Trump is obviously appealing this ruling, but in the meantime, a U.S. federal court has now overruled a lower court saying, nope, the tariffs are back on, asswipe. And so that's going to happen pretty much until either a Supreme Court ruling or until an appeals court ruling reinstates them permanently, because what the fuck are the lower courts doing? Jesus Christ. You're really going to tell me that a lower court federal judge has the power to stop the president when it comes to world matters like trade and fucking negotiation? You got me fucked up, son. So more than likely the tariffs will be reinstated all the way, because why the fuck wouldn't they be? He's the president. And this will be a blow to the lower courts, who need to learn to shut the fuck up because you don't have the authority over the executive, bitch. You see, judicial misconduct comes when you purposely go after someone because of their politics, which is what most of these asswipes have been doing. So thank God a court with a brain actually stepped in and said, nope, sorry, you're overstepping your authority, dipshit. So we'll see what happens in the future, but yes, that needs to happen. Holy fuck, federal judges are way out of control.
In breaking news, we now have a second court blocking Trump's tariffs that he attempted to impose under the International Emergency Economic Power Act. This court is in D.C. The federal district judge there granted the two companies that sued a preliminary injunction, meaning that Trump can't impose tariffs against them. This is separate than the ruling that we just got from the International Trade Court, which ruled that it was unconstitutional imposition of tariffs. There are still ongoing lawsuits throughout the countries because many states' attorney generals sued over this, as well as the Koch brothers foundation sued over this same issue, which means this is most likely just the beginning of a floodgate of wins against Trump's tariffs.
We have huge breaking news right now. A federal judge has just invalidated most of Donald Trump's tariffs, saying that Donald Trump's tariffs exceeded his authority under the IEEPA. Minutes ago, the Court of International Trade struck down Donald Trump's tariffs imposed under his executive authority. And these tariffs that were just struck down include the reciprocal tariffs that were applied to all countries across the globe. Now, significantly, that means Donald Trump now has to lift tariffs on everyone, including China and all these other countries. And the 90-day stay of the tariffs is coming up. Well, if these tariffs were invalid, then there's no more 90-day stay, because the tariffs can't be imposed by Donald Trump under his authority on the IEEPA, which is a law that the president can use to kind of enforce tariffs or introduce tariffs during national emergencies. This is a major loss for the Trump administration. We'll see what happens next. Spread the word.
So this just happened, and it's massive. A federal court just killed Donald Trump's tariffs, all of them. The U.S. Court of International Trade, a 3-judge panel, unanimous decision, just issued a permanent injunction. That means Trump's tariffs on China, Mexico, Canada, basically the entire globe, is gone, dead, nullified. And get this, one of the judges was appointed by Trump himself, another Reagan. These tariffs weren't small either. We're talking 30% on Chinese imports, 25% on our neighbors, and a baseline 10% on nearly every other country. Trump bypassed Congress using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, declaring a so-called economic emergency. Sound familiar? That's what he did with immigration too, using made-up threats to unlock sweeping powers. This time, he said Venezuela was behind a gang invasion, invoked by the Alien Enemies Act, and tried to strong-arm global trade. The court said, absolutely not. They ruled that Trump exceeded presidential authority under the law. So now, there's a permanent restraining order. Trump has a restraining order on him. They legally can't impose these tariffs under this emergency act. Not now, not ever, unless this gets overturned. And no, the courts didn't put this on pause for an appeal. It goes effective immediately. The tariffs are over. Wall Street reacted fast, Dow futures skyrocketed, because for the business world, this is a relief. But here's the thing, Trump will appeal, he'll rage post, he'll likely attack the judges, even his own appointee, and accused them of being soft or liberal, but the rule stands right now, and he's got an uphill battle. This is a huge defeat for his economic agenda and the emergency powers approach he's been using to rule by decree.
This is super long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but we will go through some of the things that he says in here. At first, he's just bitching about the courts taking away his tariffs because, of course, he can't just put tariffs on unilaterally because Congress does tariffs. Then he goes on to say that the 3 judges who ruled in this case only did so in the way that they did because they hate Trump. Where do these initial 3 judges come from? How is it possible for them to have potentially done so much damage to the United States of America? Is it purely a hatred of Trump? What other reason could it be? Then he goes on this weird thing about how he used the Federalist Society to pick judges, and then he found out that it was under the thumb of a real sleazebag named Leonard Leo, a bad person who in his own way probably hates America, and obviously has his own separate ambitions. Sleazebag, a guy that he initially trusted. Then he again incorrectly describes how tariffs work. In this case, it is only because of my successful use of tariffs that many trillions of dollars have already been pouring into the USA from other countries. Money that without these tariffs would not be able to get. Well, that's just not how tariffs work. You, the American taxpayer, you pay those tariffs because you are paying the increased price on the product, because a tariff is a tax on an imported good paid by the importer that is then passed down to the consumer. He then correctly describes what's in the Constitution. The horrific decision stated that I would have to get the approval of Congress from these tariffs. In other words, hundreds of politicians would sit around D.C. for weeks and even months trying to come to a conclusion as to what to charge other countries that are treating us unfairly. Again, not charging other countries, just charging our importers. And yeah, the Constitution says that they are the ones who set the tariffs. Then he bitches about not having enough executive power, even though he's just trying to unilaterally make all of these executive orders and whatever. He goes, if allowed to stand, this would completely destroy presidential power. The presidency would never be the same. Okay. Then, of course, radical left judges, together with some very bad people, are destroying America. Under this decision, trillions of dollars will be lost by our country, money that will make America great again. Again, other countries don't pay tariffs, so weird. Yeah, I really didn't want to make a video today because I'm dealing with some other personal shit in my life that I'm trying to figure out. But yeah, here you go. A video every day. Enjoy.
This just in, a federal appeals court has just reinstated Donald Trump's tariffs after they were blocked by the U.S. Court of International Trade. This is kind of a typical thing that happens with the appeals process, where these decisions get stayed while these appeals play out. This is a temporary decision. We will see what happens. Let me fill you in on just a few other details. Here's the decision from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. You can see number 2 over here. The request for an immediate administrative stay is granted to the extent that the judgments and the permanent injunctions entered by the Court of International Trade in these cases are temporarily stayed until further notice, while this case considers the motions papers. This is basically that typical ping-ponging of the U.S. court system. A decision is made, an appeal is filed. Oftentimes the court stays the decision based on the appeal to allow the defendant to appeal the case. That's exactly what we're seeing here. All ordinary things happening with the court system. We're going to see what continues to happen as this progresses. We'll be staying on top of it all. Make sure you're following our account and add the Midas Touch podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
You may have seen that Trump's tariffs were put on pause by one court and then unpaused by another court. And if you're wondering why that back and forth always seems to happen, or what is happening in general with Trump's tariffs right now, follow along, I'll explain. So first and foremost, the president of the United States is not supposed to be able to levy tariffs or regulate trade really in any way. That power falls on Congress. Trump has been able to add these tariffs on foreign nations under something called the IEEPA, which stands for the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. He invoked it in an executive order, which if you search Trump Economic Emergency Executive Order, you can find it here. This is what it looks like. And what this act does is it says the president is able to take on some of these trade-related powers if they invoke a national emergency. So that's what Trump did. He said he's invoking his authority under this act to address the national emergency posed by the large and persistent trade deficit, and he's imposing a 10% tariff on all countries. And of course, this is where Trump's tariff journey started. It has since evolved. But now what is happening in the courts? To understand that, it's really helpful to understand the framework that our federal courts run on. And it starts always with a plaintiff, which is the person or the group that has a complaint that they want to bring to a court. And you bring that complaint to a U.S. district court. There are 94 of them in the United States, and they're broken up by region. So wherever you live or wherever the complaint takes place, you go to that district court. Separately, at this same level, there are 2 trial courts where it doesn't matter the location, it just matters the topic. And those are called the Federal Claims Court and the Court of International Trade. So if the case has to do with one of those two topics, it'll take place in one of those courts, regardless of the location of the case. A decision is then made at this district level. If you disagree with the decision and you want a second opinion, you can appeal it. That bumps your case up to a U.S. Court of Appeals. There are 13 of them. In a court of appeals, they can overturn the decision that is made at the district level. So that is what has currently happened. Trump's case was heard in a district court. They said he needed to pause the tariffs. He appealed that decision, and now a U.S. Court of Appeals has said his tariffs can continue for now, and I'll explain more about that in a second. If you wind up disagreeing with what the Court of Appeals says, you can ultimately then kick it up to the Supreme Court. But very notably, the Supreme Court takes on very few cases. Because Donald Trump is president, they're taking on a lot of his grievances right now, but for the average person, it's very unlikely that your case would ever be heard by the Supreme Court. So now what does this case look like for Trump specifically? There was a plaintiff. They brought their complaint to the Court of International Trade, which is one of these two trial courts. The Court of International Trade said Trump needed to pause his tariff. Trump immediately appealed that decision, and it was sent to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit said Trump's tariffs can continue for now. So looking at it a little more closely, who is the plaintiff? You can find the court documents by searching this. The key is always putting full text at the end of your search. That brings up the actual documents you're looking for versus just an article about them. And with that search, I can find information both from the Court of International Trade and the Court of Appeals. I'm going to click the Court of International Trade first. And here it is, and you can see who the plaintiffs are. It's Voss, Inc.'s Plastic Services, and then also all of these states. So it's two separate complaints, two separate plaintiffs. And you can see who the complaints are against. The United States of America, the United States Customs and Border Protection, you can read, and then down here you can see United States Department of Homeland Security and some more. And what the Court of International Trade ultimately ruled is that Donald Trump did not have authority to use this act to levy tariffs, and so his tariffs needed to be put on pause. Trump then obviously disagreed with that decision, so he appealed it. And this is what the Court of Appeals ruled. You can pause to read it. But what they said is that Trump can continue his tariffs for now while they rule on the case. So they didn't rule on whether or not he can use this act. They just said, we'll rule on it. You can continue the tariffs for now. Both sides, you need to consolidate some information, give us some briefs, give us some more information on your case, and we'll make a ruling. So that means right now the case of whether or not Trump can continue his tariffs is in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. When they ultimately rule on it and whether or not Trump was able to invoke this act, that decision could again be appealed up to the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court takes on the case, they could make the final ruling on it. And then whatever the Supreme Court says goes. So for now, Trump's tariffs are in place, and we will see what happens.
Trump's tariffs just got blocked. Wall Street celebrating, but should you be? Federal judge just struck down part of President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs. You know, the ones aimed at leveling the trade field. Wall Street, they're loving it. Stocks jumped, oil climbed, the dollar surged, because big investors think this means fewer trade disruptions. Hey, but here's what no one's asking. What about American workers? I mean, what about small manufacturers who've been begging for protection from cheap imports? I mean, you're not going to hear that on CNBC. But go ask a machinist in Ohio what this means. Because while the media spins this as great for the economy, it's really great for some people, the ones who profit depends on cheap overseas labor. Trump's critics say the tariffs would have hurt consumers. Supporters say, well, they were needed to bring jobs back. So here's the real question. Whose economy are we cheering for? Wall Street's or Main Street's? Hey, keep those comments coming.
More bad news for Trump and his tariffs. A second court in the United States has ruled that his tariffs are illegal, and he cannot use the 1970s era law stating that there is an emergency that requires him putting tariffs in place because, well, there isn't an emergency. So his last best bet to keep his tariffs going is the Supreme Court. So we will see what happens when they're presented with a pretty clear case that there is no emergency here, so there is no justification for allowing him to put these tariffs in just because he wants to use them as a negotiating tactic, which, by the way, there are no trade deals done, which he promised there would be. The other bad thing for him is that all of the countries that apparently he says are negotiating with him are clearly not going to make any deals now because they're looking at the courts and saying, why would I give up anything if he's not going to be able to use the threat that he has anyways? And the tariffs are really the big thing that he has put his whole entire presidency on, is the success of these things, which, by the way, are attacks on the American public and will drive prices through the roof. So in a weird way, his presidency might actually be more successful if the courts don't let him do the things that he's doing because he was given an economy that was doing very well under Joe Biden. And it's similar to what happened in 2017 when he took over from Barack Obama. He also inherited a good economy and then, of course, trashed it into the dirt. But this actually might be the best thing for the American public. Well, it is the best thing for the American public, but it also might be the best thing for Trump. Now, he'll squander it with all kinds of other dumb things. Obviously, he's doing lots of racist and ridiculous things. So it's not really going to help him, but maybe it will help us avert disaster, since these things, if they go into effect, will absolutely be a disaster for the United States and the world. So courts, keep it up.
So now the courts have ruled that Trump's tariffs are not okay. And they just wiped out months of negotiations and progress that he made. Reciprocal tariffs, okay? Just charging the countries what they charge the American taxpayer. Just reciprocal. And the Democrats, 12 Democratic states, and the biggest corporations in America that you and I made filthy rich came together. Coca-Cola, Apple, Amazon, Walmart, Target, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson. It goes on and on. They came together to stop the tariffs. And they did. They won. So not only are tariffs not allowed right now, but we have to return every single dollar, every penny that we earned from it. Ain't that something? First, the Democrats ran around and went to other countries for the illegal criminal element, wife beater guy. They went to El Salvador to check on him, make sure he's okay. Stopped all deportations from all of the illegal immigration and the criminal element that came into our country. Unchecked, unverified, undocumented, with criminal backgrounds. Can't deport them either. So every single thing that the vast majority of Americans want and believed in, every element of our government except one guy is doing everything in their power to stop it and to keep the status quo, because they don't work for you and I. They work for their donors, the big corporations, their lobbyists, and the cartels. And they just want our money. They just need our money. And the illusion that we, the people, are in control. I'm disgusted. I'm sick to my stomach because there's no way out.
The federal United States Court of International Trade gave Donald Trump a huge gift by ruling that his tariffs, almost all of them, were unconstitutional, that they were an unconstitutional overreach of his presidential powers, because Congress has the constitutional authority to set taxes and tariffs. But what people are not thinking about is this is actually saving Donald Trump's ass, because if the tariffs had been allowed to continue and take effect and hurt America, especially in the red states, there would have been an uprising where the people would go to their Republican members of Congress and insist that they finally stand up to Donald Trump. So, yet again, the luckiest man in the world got lucky. Now, I'm happy the court did that, but yet again, Donald Trump escapes consequences for his horrific, immoral, amoral, batshit crazy things that he does. He's the luckiest man in the world. Happy that it happened, but not happy that Donald Trump yet again is not going to have to face the consequences of his insanity.
Donald Trump just got some really, really bad news, and I'm really excited to talk about it. I was actually trying to search on the Associated Press's website for an article from a few days ago, and I clicked on the breaking news, I'm like a little bit giddy about the story. A federal trade court just blocked Trump from imposing his sweeping tariffs under the emergency powers law. It's 4:45 p.m. Pacific time on May 28th, and this article was published 20 minutes ago by Lindsay Whitehurst of the Associated Press. Basically, Trump just got smacked down really hard on all of his tariffs. It's like I said, he tries to do things that are not legal, and we need to be really careful that we are not giving him power that he does not have. Just because he signs some executive order that one of his cronies wrote, or some Project 2025 dude wrote, or ChatGPT wrote, that doesn't mean that it's legal. It doesn't mean he gets to do that thing. An executive order is not a law. A decree that he barfs up on Truth Social, not the law, y'all. He is trying to do all kinds of illegal shit. His, modus operandi is basically like, try and stop me. And the courts consistently are saying, nope, this thing you're doing is illegal. Nope, the courts are holding in so many important ways right now. And this is a really big one, because we all know that his chaotic usage of tariffs, slapping them on, pulling them back, slapping them on again, up and down with the amounts, that's supposed to make your head spin. It's supposed to make the economy become destabilized. It's absolutely something that a narcissist does when he tries to control you. He tries to make you feel unmoored. That's what Trump is trying to do with the economy. He's trying to do it to our whole nation. He's trying to do it to the global economy and our trading partners. And today, Wednesday, May 28th, good news, a federal trade court said absolutely not. They blocked Donald Trump from imposing sweeping tariffs on imports under the emergency powers law. Just because he's citing a law, y'all, doesn't mean he has the legal authority to use it. It doesn't mean he is appropriately applying that law. The ruling from a 3-judge panel at the New York-based Court of International Trade came after several lawsuits arguing Trump has exceeded his authority, left U.S. trade policy dependent on his whims, and unleashed economic chaos. At least 7 lawsuits are challenging the levies, the centerpiece of Trump's trade policy. He's going to be real not cheesed, y'all, when he hears about this ruling. Again, the centerpiece of his trade policy, of his retribution seeking, of his chaotic control, of his grift. And the courts are saying, you don't get to do this. As I have said from the day he announced his tariff plan, or the first iteration of it, because again, the constant need to change it, the keeping you on your toes, the making your head spin with all of the roll it out, pull it back, all of the alterations, the changing amounts, that is on purpose. That chaos is intentional. But as I said, since he first announced the first iteration of his tariffs, the president cannot just slap tariffs on other countries. Tariffs are something that are rolled out and approved by Congress. But Trump tried to claim that he has the power to act on his own unilaterally because the country's trade deficits amount to a national emergency. He and his band of wholly unqualified lawyers have used all kinds of excuses, very flimsy or non-existent legal claims, in order to try to justify his extreme authoritarian overreach, the way he is skirting the law and stealing power from the legislative branch. At one point, Trump had slapped tariffs on almost every country in the world. Let's not forget he tried to put tariffs on uninhabited islands. I mean, way to appeal to his grandiose sense of self-importance, to be like, haha, I can absolutely fuck over the entire global economy. I can destroy millions of Americans' retirement accounts. All because I feel like it. All because I'm mad about what happened in 2020. All because I want to game the market and help. Whatever it is that's his motivation, I imagine he really revels in that sense of power. Watching Republicans in Congress freely give up their checks and balances, freely give up their power as Congress, and allow Donald Trump to do whatever he wants, to act like a king. I'm sure Trump revels in that power, which is why we have all of these checks and balances in the first place, which is why he's not allowed to do these things in the first place. That is so much power. It is causing so much damage, and it's all grabbed illegally. And today a court said no. So the argument that the government was making here was that the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, was giving him the authority to unilaterally slap all these tariffs on, stating that we are somehow in a state of emergency. And the plaintiffs who brought these lawsuits said, no, that's not correct. So according to the Associated Press, the plaintiffs who brought those lawsuits were basically claiming two things. One is that the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act did not authorize Trump to slap on those tariffs in the first place. And the second one is that even if it did, like, let's concede for a moment that, okay, he could claim that that act gave him the authority to put these tariffs on. They're saying even if it did say that, which they contend it doesn't, that the trade deficit does not meet the law's requirement of an emergency that would trigger what is written in the law as, listen, quote, an unusual and extraordinary threat, end quote. Because keep in mind, the United States has run a trade deficit with the rest of the world for 49 consecutive years. Why would it be suddenly this year that it amounts to an unusual and extraordinary threat? So because Trump hates the fact that the courts are standing on the side of the law and are checking his authoritarian overreach, which is, by the way, of course, why Trump and the Republicans have snuck in this line in his big, beautiful budget reconciliation bill. This line that says, no court of the United States may use appropriated funds to enforce a contempt citation for failure to comply with an injunction or temporary restraining order. They're basically trying to hamstring judges from enforcing their orders because Trump knows he's losing. His cronies are losing in court. And all he can try and do is illegally and embarrassingly, obviously, I know they thought they were going to sneak that in, hinder the courts from doing their job. They can't win by following the law. His grasp on power is weak, y'all. So he has to try shady shit like this. And of course, the Republicans in Congress are helping. Anyway, okay, back to this ruling. Because Trump hates the fact that the courts are overwhelmingly checking his overreach, the administration has argued that the courts approved then President Richard Nixon's emergency use of tariffs back in 1971. And what Trump is saying is that now only Congress and not the courts can determine the political question of whether the president's rationale for declaring an emergency complies with the law. He's basically saying that the courts can't rule on whether something is in compliance with the law, because what they're going to do is rule against him. They're going to rule that what he's doing is not in compliance with the law. So therefore, they can't rule. They can't rule at all. So this is a really big win for democracy, and we'll see where it goes from here. If Trump no longer has this chaotic tool in his toolbox with which to hold threats over people's heads, with which to coerce corporations, with which to simultaneously shake down corporations and also like extend them favors, like, hey, if you do what I want, I will lift tariffs on, your specific thing that you care about, because after all, it's all about the grift. If he doesn't have that tool in his toolbox, I guarantee he's going to have a temper tantrum over it. He does not like being told no. He does not like being constrained. I expect we may see some bout of narcissistic rage and attempt at retribution as a result of this. But it doesn't matter. We still need to all be doing the right thing. The courts need to be ruling on the side of the law, whether or not we anticipate Trump upping his repression, upping his antics as a result of being told no, absolutely not. So this is good news. I was glad to see this as a breaking story, and now I'm going to get back to hunting for the article I was searching for.
I can't say there's quite anything that exemplifies the ineptitude of Donald Trump's second presidency like his tariffs policy. See, up here in Canada, we don't particularly care. We'll be just fine. But it's the yo-yo nature of his desire to implement them or not implement them or implement them or not implement them that has left everybody going, the fuck is wrong with this guy? And then yesterday, the American legal system said, no, you can't do these tariffs. This is not legal. And then today they said, yeah, you can for now. Like, we already know that Donald Trump doesn't really care a whole lot about what's legal and what isn't. But it's hilarious to me that the American legal system can't even decide for itself anymore what's legal and what isn't. Let's not pretend for a second that Trump didn't overreach. Because using a law intended for national emergencies when there's no national emergencies is illegal. It's economic cosplay and it violated the Constitution. This wasn't America first. It's lawlessness with a flag on it, which, to be perfectly frank, is pretty much America in a nutshell right now. Because if your big economic move gets turned over in court later, it wasn't policy, it was a stunt. And Americans are paying for it big time, and Trump really hasn't even got started yet. I see absolutely no way that this ends well for America.
You guys, I feel like I said it last week, the energy had shifted. I feel like now the wheels have fully fallen off. To have that reporter look that man in the face and risk everything to ask him if he'd heard about the stock traders calling it like taco Trump always chickens out. And his response is going on a list of times that he chickened out as a defense was a masterpiece, and hopefully will be written in the new history books that we have to rewrite after this is all over. And then within hours, the court saying his tariffs are basically null and void. He doesn't have the power to do tariffs. It takes away everything he had been planning and promising and talking about. And without the tariffs, he can't afford to pay for his tax cuts for his billionaire buddies. It's all going to fall apart. There's no way to pay for it now. And he owes all those billionaire buddies a lot because they helped him. And now he's not going to be able to help them. And they're going to be mad about that. Like when the stock market was doing really bad a couple weeks ago, like after he announced the tariffs, I was like, this man isn't trying to intentionally crash the stock market. And then every time it would crash, he'd back off because he did. He always chickened out. And then I realized his ego was too tied up in the stock market. It's always been an indicator to him of how well a president's doing. He said it. He said it himself. So he does. He literally, and I was like, I stopped worrying about the stock market. I stopped even checking it because I know it'll drop and then he'll back out. He'll change it. He'll, and it'll bump back up. And I was seeing what the stockbrokers were also seeing. The traders were also seeing. He does. He always chickens out. I mean, I think that was like the most in-your-face narcissistic injury he could get. Just his response to it, where you saw him get like flabbergasted. And whatever retaliation he does, it's just going to look pathetic. And he loses, like the more people that point and laugh at him and aren't afraid of him, the better. Because he's losing his power. He's losing his influence. And it just needs to keep happening. It needs to be a rolling wave of people just pointing and laughing until there's nothing left. He is already a shell of a person. He's already expended every ounce of energy, positive energy, no positive energy, but the power that he had is dwindling. There is nothing left. The ship is sinking. And it's going to be fun to watch. I just hope it all makes his blood pressure rise and things go pop.
The Federal International Trade Court ruled that the Trump tariffs are no longer. They ruled that Trump exceeded his authorities as the president on those tariffs, and they have nullified them. All of them. With a permanent injunction, might I add. Permanent, heavy on the permanent. And yeah, he can appeal, and most likely he'll appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court. But at this moment in time, the beautiful, lovely tariffs are gone. Have a great night.
All right, so I got one for you today. Let's talk about this latest power play in the Russia-Ukraine EU SMS. Trump's Senate is pushing this bill to slap 500% tariff on anyone buying fuel from Russia. That sounds tough, right? Like a real, business kind of move, isn't it? But guess who's still out there buying billions of dollars worth of Russian energy every single month? Yes, the EU, you guessed it. The same EU that's been yelling about sanctions and waving Ukraine's flag. Here's the kicker. In 2024 alone, the EU bought over $22 billion worth of fossil fuels from Russia, more than $19 billion that they gave Ukraine in financial aid. And you can't make this stuff up. And here's where it gets really good. You think these tariffs are going to stop the EU? No, they've already got the scam in place. It's been there. Ship the Russian oil over to Kazakhstan, mix in just 1% of Kazakh oil, and bam, magically, Kazakh blend, and not Russian anymore. It's the same scam, different day. The EU will scream and cry victim about these tariffs. They'll claim it's unfair and protectionist. Liberals will go nuts. It's a trade war. This hurts global cooperation. But the EU knows full well that it's business as usual for them. They'll keep bringing in Russian oil under a new label. Simple as that. And here's the part that got me thinking. It begs the question, does Trump know this? Is he playing tough for the cameras, knowing full well the EU is going to skirt the rules like they always do? Is this just another stage show to make it look like he's slamming down on Russia while everyone's still making money off the same oil? I don't know. Let's put it in perspective. That blended oil, we're talking enough barrels to heat over 2 million homes for a whole year. Yeah, 2 million homes. So the EU is going to cry foul, the liberals are going to raise hell, and he gets to flex. But behind the scenes, it's the same game, different day. They keep playing it, we keep paying it. And they call this foreign policy? Well, please, looks more like a bad soap opera with worse actors.
On my way home to Connecticut, and just wanted to say that the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit just issued a temporary administrative stay, a pause of our judgment stopping the president's unlawful and unconstitutional tariffs. We knew this appeal was coming. We're ready for this appeal. We can't wait to get into court to defend this judgment because we know that the president doesn't have the authority under the Constitution or under federal law to levy the tariffs in the way that he's attempted to levy them, and that they're doing a tremendous amount of damage to Connecticut families and small businesses and families and small businesses across the country. We're going to fight hard, continue to fight hard, as long as it takes to protect Connecticut and our sister states and families and small businesses here in our country.
And the Trump tariff roller coaster ride continues. Breaking just now, a federal circuit court of appeals has just ruled that they are reinstating Trump's Liberation Day tariffs that a lower court blocked yesterday. This happened as the Trump administration's legal team appealed that ruling yesterday right away in no surprise, and now the Court of Appeals has said, we're pausing that ruling. We need more time to hear the pleadings and decide on this case. This is a huge case. So we'll see what happens going forward, how the stock market will react now. It was kind of up. It wasn't a huge rebound, but it wasn't dropping at all. But I would imagine there could be a sell-off now that the tariffs are going to be back into effect. So we'll see what happens. This is just a roller coaster ride no one thought we would be on right now and didn't expect. And I think it's a unanimous feeling that most Americans want off this roller coaster ride. Let me know what you think. Comment, like, share, spread the word, and I'll see you back here for the 411.
Donald Trump just took another win, and Money Mayweather better move over because we have a new undisputed champion. I released a video earlier today that 3 federal judges from the U.S. Court of International Affairs came out and ruled that Trump's global tariffs were illegal and they need to be stopped immediately. And I cited that the court said that Trump used tariffs illegally for reasons that aren't allowed under law. And I mentioned that he was probably going to appeal this. Well, a second court came out and actually tried to double down and said, no, for sure, his tariffs are illegal. Well, the U.S. Appeals Court came out and said that, yeah, no problem. He can reinstate his tariffs during the appeal process against the federal courts that blocked it. So during the appeals process, Trump's tariffs will continue, and more than likely, he's probably going to win in the appeals court. But mind you that the reason why the initial court had blocked his tariffs were citing his intentions behind it. He stated that his intentions were for national security against illegal immigration and drug trafficking. But the court that originally blocked Trump's tariffs said that that wasn't his intention, and that's why they deemed it illegal. And I'm going to share something with you that a lot of attorneys would agree with. You can't prove intention in a court. So you can't say that Trump's intention was to get retaliation against other countries because you can't prove it. And so these courts basically just wasted tax dollars on things that they're probably not going to win. And Trump will get another W.
We're in this really bad loophole. Trump's tariffs just got reinstated. And yeah, that's bad news for your wallet, for small businesses yet again, and for the damn stock market. The courts are flip-flopping, and meanwhile, man, we're all stuck paying the fucking price. The Trump administration is throwing our economy into chaos over tariffs that were already ruled illegal. And you and I, we're going to talk about it. So let's talk you and I. Let's talk about what's currently going down. Trump used the emergency powers under something called the IEEPA to throw a blanket 10% tariff on everything we import, plus even more on China, Mexico, and Canada. Remember, he called these things the Liberation Day tariffs like he's freeing us from something. But what he's really doing is raising prices across the board. Now, a federal trade court's judge said, you can't do that. You overstepped. They ruled the tariffs illegal. That should have been the end of it. But then Trump's team appealed like we knew they would, and now an appeals court just temporarily reinstated these damn tariffs while the case plays out. So we're back to paying more. We're back to step one. Higher prices on tech, shoes, groceries, toys, electronics, you name it. And listen, this isn't just about importers or economists. It's about you and I. The extra 10% markup, it's hitting your cart at Walmart because they're not going to eat the tariffs. It's making small businesses scared to stock inventories, triggering layoffs in shipping and logistics. Ports are slowing down still, and stores are freezing orders. In the market, volatile as hell, man. Some stocks are up only because companies are trying to raise prices to cover for these tariffs. That's called artificial growth. That's not real. This is a financial whiplash caused by a one-man playing dictator with a global trade. But he'll claim victory somehow because the numbers will spike up because of all his mishaps. Here's my question. Why are we letting this happen without Congress stepping in still? Are we just okay with presidents unilaterally just jacking up prices because they woke up and said they wanted to? Can you sound off in the comments? How do you feel about the courts letting these tariffs go back into effect while they're being challenged? Please make sure you hit the follow button if you're new. Hit the link in my bio. Follow me everywhere else, including my second TikTok account where we continue to break things down in the political world. We have to talk about this because if we don't, they'll keep pretending we're not paying attention. And I always say this. I like to talk about the news with you, not report it.